Hey, it's Norm from Test, and I'm joined by Frank Ippolito. Now, Frank, of course, you guys know is an effects artist down here in LA, and today you're joining me. I brought you along for an amazing tour. You're excited. Frank is super excited. I'm excited as well, because as you can see, we're in a warehouse full of amazing original props. These are Rick Baker's props from his collection. They're going on auction this week from Prop Store. Frank, we're in a warehouse full of like movie history.
It's just aisles and aisles and aisles of stuff that probably hasn't seen the light of day since it was on screen or on set.
What's the stuff that you're most excited about?
I like some of the weird, obscure stuff, like some of the old animatronic stuff from Greystoke, or some of the like background zombies from Haunted Mansion, like things that aren't necessarily the big, popular things. Like I like the weird, quirky things.
And Rick Baker, his shop, worked on so many films, so many seminal films. We're talking about Planet of the Apes, Gremlins, Batman, Men in Black, of course. I want to hear all those stories. Well, we're going to be joined by Rick Baker in just a moment and hear some of those stories directly from him and chat with him. So stick with us. So this is it, guys. This is Rick Baker. Rick, I'm so pleased to meet you. Thank you so much for coming and talking about your collection.
Yeah, a lot of stuff here.
So much. It's a warehouse full of stuff.
Yeah.
It's your life's work. I want to hear about it all. Let's start at the very beginning.
How much time have you got?
Well, hopefully a lot of time. Hopefully you guys got the time too.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, when you first started, one of the first movies you worked on was with John Landis. And you worked with a couple projects with him. American Werewolf and also Thriller.
But I did Schlock before that.
And Schlock with him as well. What was makeup like back then and the process?
Well, it actually hasn't changed all that much. I mean, the biggest difference now is that we use more silicone than foam rubber, but back in that day we still used foam rubber. And again, one of the bigger differences is the adhesives. Back when I did Schlock, we only had spirit gum, which is basically tree sap, and it would only hold on for so long. At the end of the day, the pieces were just hanging on,
So your techniques kind of stayed the same?
The same basic techniques are the same, the molding and casting and all, whether you're casting in foam rubber or in silicone now, and there's some better molding materials, epoxies and stuff.
Yeah.
But the basic technique hasn't changed all that much.
Technology back then, now these appliances that we have here, some of these are decades old, or the originals that you use.
Yeah, this one is actually, was from American Werewolf in London. The sculpture was originally. This was Jack, stage 3, which is when he's in the porno theater and he's basically a puppet. But there is an exterior shot where he's outside the theater, and it was Griffin wearing this basic appliance from this mold anyways. And then later, when I did Thriller, which was kind of a quick and dirty, get a bunch of stuff done, we pulled out the old Jack molds and cast up some versions of that for some Thriller zombies.
Oh, wow.
This was actually one that was made up for Thriller, which is, as you can see, pretty decomposed at the moment.
So when you look at something like this and you think back to how you were sculpting and how you were creating these appliances back then, what was your mindset back then? Were you still learning?
Well, I'm still learning. I started as a 10-year-old. I mean, that's when I made the decision that I was going to be a makeup artist when I grew up. But I also decided I was never going to grow up, which I haven't. And it's so amazing to me, actually, that I made it and that people even know who the hell I am, and that I actually got to do this thing for a living, because it was just a wild dream, I wasn't born into the film industry, didn't know anybody in the film industry, and the more I started finding out, the more I realized how hard it was going to be, and again, every day basically I pinch myself and say, I've been so lucky, I got to make my hobby my occupation and do well at it.
That's so awesome. And your work, your studio is kind of synonymous with these creatures, these memorable creatures from iconic films now. What were the creatures that most interested you when you started?
I think the first things were the Universal monsters, the things that Jack Pierce created, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, still my favorite stuff. And also I was really inspired by Lon Chaney Sr. stuff. I mean, I think some of his makeups haven't been topped, and that's where you're talking about a big change. I mean, everything Chaney did was out of the kit. His makeup kit, he, would put stuff on his face on a daily basis and pull things and stretch things and do all this stuff. But they're phenomenal makeups. The Phantom of the Opera is amazing. London After Midnight, amazing. And I think in a lot of ways the limitations were a benefit. Now you can do so much, and I see it happen all the time. For example, on Face Off, everybody does these really big, elaborate, big masks, basically. They're too thick and too much, and you kind of lose some of the humanity.
The performance.
Yeah.
So some of those performances I love from the creatures you've designed are the monkeys, the apes. You've worked on a lot of those. Let's take a look at those.
Okay.
Rick, we got some apes here.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about this piece?
Well, this was one of the Greystoke apes. This was a Greystoke ape's hair suit, which each one of these hairs is individually tied into a spandex foundation.
Wow.
This was one of the stunt masks. Actually, the foam rubber masks are pretty rotten. I think there's a mechanism of one over there somewhere. But yeah, that was a big job for me. That was the first really big job that I ever did, and it was in London, and I was there for 14 months, and it was tough but fun.
What did you want to bring to that when you're designing, an ape suit?
Well, the thing that was cool was that, they were fantasy apes in the sense that, most of the research they did was based on Jane Goodall's research with chimps. But in the Tarzan books, they're always called apes. They're not chimps or gorillas. So, I had a little latitude to make them, a little different. But what I liked is making individual characters out of them. Apes are as individual as you and I, and so many films before, everyone looks exactly the same, and I really wanted to make them individual characters. So I spent a lot of time, especially on the principal ape. So there's a picture of me back in the day in England sculpting these 6 or 8 heads all at once. I kind of was working on them simultaneously so I could look at each one and make sure that they were very radically different.
So they had a personality that at least you could recognize. You're hoping that the audience can recognize, and it works for the actor as well.
Yeah, I think it helps that they don't just look like every other ape, too. And the apes also. They rehearsed for a very long time and were really getting into it. And the fun thing on that movie too was we had real chimps that played the babies in the film, and a bunch of other wild animals. And like I said, I think Greystoke's the hardest I've ever worked in my life. I was doing 7-day weeks all day and all night basically, until I dropped. And I actually ended up living in a little trailer outside the soundstage. We had a soundstage that we made at my workshop there, and it was right next to the soundstage where the jungle set was, where we shot. And I lived in this little trailer outside, so I could get a half hour or an hour's more sleep in the night.
Really putting yourself into it.
Yeah, but it was fun because I got the animal trainer lived in a trailer too, so so I got to play with baby tigers and baby bears and awesome. Black panthers and got to learn. These chimps, their personalities really well. It was a lot of fun.
Now, in addition to masks and bodysuits, you're also at that point starting to develop different mechanized apparatus.
Yeah, all the apes were mechanized. They either had a self-contained mechanism that the actors could work themselves with their jaw, and the lips would move back, and then we had cable-controlled masks, and we had these mechanical hands. These were Greystoke arm extensions. Let's see if I can get my arm in this.
So this is something you built 30 odd years ago.
Yeah,
and
I can't get my arm in it. But anyways, when you pull these levers, it moves the fingers. So the finger and the thumb are tied in together here. So yeah, proportionally, so we could get a more ape-like proportion. And we also had what we called mechanical extended finger gloves, which were ones that the guys could wear, but we extended their fingers by that and that much more, raised the palm up. So they had these mechanical hands that were bigger and more ape-like with the kind of big sausage fingers, So. But yeah, it was a lot of work. We had so much stuff, and the thing with that was, I did it in England, and most of my crew were English, and I brought a handful of guys from LA that I'd worked with on American Werewolf, and the English crew were great, but they didn't understand how we finish things and how things are they would do a sculpture that I would consider blocked out, and they would think it was done. It's like, no, we got to refine all this, do all that, and it was a real learning curve for them. And they also thought I was crazy because, at 5 o'clock, they go to the pub, and that's when I really started my serious work, and I'd work until 2 a.m. every night, and the funny thing now is, last film I did in England, which was Wolfman, they they so do it exactly like we do here now, and they have these tools that were, designed by Mitch Devane, who's a sculptor that worked with me a lot, came up with all kinds of tools for texturing, and they all know all that stuff. It's basically, the information's out there now.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And they consider, Greystoke, to the English crews there too, it was kind of like, the Holy Grail is like where they learned how to do this stuff, And,
That's cool.
Yeah.
And you're a part of that. You're the heart of it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a decade later. You're working on it. If you've done different types of gorillas and apes, it's for something like Mighty Joe Young. Where were you then, and how did those designs compare?
Gorillas in the Mist happened first, and the thing that was great about that was, I always wanted to build a realistic gorilla, and nobody wanted it in Hollywood. When I did King Kong, the Dino Dellinger's King Kong, they wanted a Hollywood ape, and they wanted this biped, thing, which I was thinking, this is going to be my only opportunity to do this right, and which I was wrong. I had quite a few opportunities since then. But in Gorillas in the Mist, they had to match the real animals, and they said, we want to film the real gorillas, the mountain gorillas in Rwanda, and then we want to intercut with your suits, because we know we can't get them to do everything we want them to do. And I said, it's impossible. I said, I can build an ape suit better than anybody, but I can't build one that you can compare to the real thing, And they said, well, that's what we have to do. So I did it, and one of the things that we did that I hadn't done in ape suits before, because it's not the most practical thing. Like when I did King Kong or The Incredible Shrinking Woman, which are suits that I made, I used human eyes with contact lenses, but especially with somebody with me with a nose like this, apes have such a flat bridge of a nose. So this was basically a portrait of an ape that I photographed in Rwanda. I went to Rwanda. They said, this male gorilla is the one we're going to call Digit. So I photographed him, and I basically did a portrait of him. So you can see it's very flat across here. So it had radio-controlled eyes. And the head is actually out in front of the actor's head, kind of like that. So the vision is very limited. You can see a little bit out the nose holes. Not the most practical things for being able to see, but it looked much more like a gorilla than anything I'd ever done before. And we did basically the same thing in Joe. We had perfected some of the mechanisms. Joe had a corneal bulge on his eye, which Digit didn't. And he was able to do with one head things that we had several heads for in this. But basically, it's the same thing still.
And then in terms of what's behind the mask, the electronics and the motors, that stuff changed over time as well. In a production, are you also doing research as to what type of technologies you can put in?
Yeah, it changed when I did Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, because Harry had to do so much and be so mobile and communicate only with his expressions too. And I said, we can't have him tied down to these cables. Having worn a cable-controlled head for many, many months on King Kong and dragging these cables out, behind me, I knew what it was like to try to perform in that too. So that was the first time we did a radio-controlled head. And what was great was the research I did on Yetis and Bigfoot. They always kind of talked about kind of a pointed head, so I thought this would be great if we have this pointed head that gives me a place to put the motors, so we can have a much more direct linkage to the mechanism, so the motors weren't, on a backpack somewhere or inside the suit. It was contained within the head. And it was so great to not be tied down to the cables, and so Harry was the first of those, and these were the same.
When you're working with a character that's maybe in the world of fiction, you have a little more liberties on how you can design your mechs and your makeup. You're not using direct life reference, trying to mimic that. So let's roll right into, for example, Gremlins. These mechs right here, and it's completely fictional creatures, but amazing puppets. Can you talk about some of this puppet work that you designed?
Yeah, and this one's a marionette, actually. It is a puppet.
An actual a string puppet.
Well, the thing with, Gremlins, I turned Gremlins down numerous times, Gremlins 2, because I wasn't all that interested. Where I have fun is doing the design and creating a character that hadn't been done before. And this was already established by Chris Walas in the first movie. And I just said, I'm not that interested, And they kept after me, and they said, what can we do to interest you? And I said, well, if I can redesign them a little bit, still staying in the Gremlins world, but I said more than anything, I want to make them characters. In the original film, and it was smart to do in that film with Chris. All the Gremlins were out of the same mold. And so, you know, because you can't make one puppet that does everything, you know, you had 3 or 4 different puppets that did, you know, all the combinations of things, but all from the same mold. I said, I want to make them individual characters. And I was saying, let's base them a lot on Warner Brothers cartoon characters.
Yeah.
You know, we had Daffy, we called one Daffy. You know, we had a George and Lenny, which you used to have all the time in the Warner Brothers cartoons, you know, of mice and men kind of characters. And so we kind of based the designs on that, but that meant, you know, we would have, you know, 6 versions of Daffy and 6 versions of Lenny, 6 versions of George, you know, and so we made so much stuff for that film. It was crazy, you know, and then we also had the genetic mutant ones, like the spider gremlin and the bat gremlin, yeah. Which again, you know, it was part of me wanting to make more fun stuff, you know, so I said, we came up with that idea to do that stuff, the vegetable gremlin, you know, so we had a lot of fun.
And in terms of puppeting, for a more complicated puppet, it's just electronics inside and then wired to like a Waldo system, or how?
Yeah, there were different ones. I mean, this was more of an insert close-up one, which he had some servos that worked the eyes and the jaw. You move this thing and you could rotate the head and move it around, and there are these rods that come out the back of the arms and a little trigger that makes the hands move, and it, you know, it's basically every trick in the book. I mean, we had ones with strings on them. Yeah. You know, we had ones that just had your hand in it like this. You know,
whatever works to get that character and performance that you want out of that creature.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and then we had these big pole arm ones, which were in these boxes here, where we had the telemetry suit thing basically. So a guy would stand with this device with his arms in it, and if he moved his arm like this, the puppet moved his arm. You know, and there was a big pole that came out the back. So we had one that was a freestanding one, and it could. The feet were like mounted to the ground, but the body could shift around and move up and down, and the arms were free to do stuff without any strings or any rods. You know.
Sounds like you had a lot of fun.
You know, I've had a lot of fun my whole career. I mean, it's, like I said, how lucky am I to get to build toys and play with them, you know, and get paid to do it as well.
Hopefully in your spare time you also get to build and have fun and design things on your own?
Yeah, I mean, it's how I have fun, and if I'm not working on a film, I'm basically doing the same thing for myself, you know.
And Rick, some of that stuff that you did, maybe from lesser known movies or lesser known projects, was stuff that you also had a ton of fun with.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's all about having fun, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, let's take a look at some of that stuff.
Okay.
So Rick, I've pulled a couple of things that I think are fascinating out of this vast collection.
Just these? There's a whole bunch of fascinating stuff here.
I'm only picking a few. So there's an amazing opportunity here to just learn from some of this collection. Things like you were talking before about the woot heads from these.
Yeah, this was Greystoke. We had, again, a self-contained mechanism for hooting. So when the chimps pushed their lips out and hoot, actually what happened is it wasn't closed like this, it would bend back. So by the closing of the jaw, push these cables out to make a hoot phase, you know. So
just simple mechanics. You don't have to do crazy animatronics or.
Yeah, but it took a while to figure this out.
Oh, well, yeah, but there's a whole thought process to that. Yeah. And by kind of reverse engineering that thought process, there's really, really cool stuff in here. And then compare that to the Digit head with all the servos and machine parts and stuff like that.
Yeah, this will show what I was talking about before, where the actor's head is set back inside better, you know, back in here, and then we have these artificial eyes and the skin, again, with the hair individually punched one over that. But the same basic mechanism for the lip was something I developed early on, and what we use with Harry, where there's a loop that goes through the lip like this, which would push out, kind of like that hoot head, but also the cables that moved up and down. So a combination of moving these and this pushing in and out and rotating side to side.
Give a more organic kind of feel?
Yeah, it was very organic kind of feel, yeah.
This hand, was this from?
This was a Greystoke. This was the mechanical extended finger glove that I was talking about, where we extended the actor's hands in the palm to give him more of an ape-like proportion. So we had rubber bands that pulled it back into the open position, which has since rotted away. So I'll use gravity here, but see, it works kind of like that.
Yeah.
So this is when the long arm extensions were too much, and they needed to do something more dexterous. They could do stuff like this. And there's a scene where Silverbeard finds a gun and is playing with the gun, and he used these hands to pick it up and do stuff with it. So.
Wow. Yeah. It's just amazing stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes from, the fact that I wore the suits as well, but previous to that. So I think anybody who wears a suit that I made benefits from the fact that I've been inside this stuff, and I know what it's like, and try to make it practical and functional and look cool too.
There's a whole bunch of maquettes and like design kind of things in here. What was this one from?
This was a Men in Black. This was a Mikey maquette when we were trying to decide what Mikey was going to look like. Jordu Shell sculpted this one. But yeah, this was one, again, like what happens so often in films now is that, you know, directors and producers and so many people are involved in the design process and they want to see things, so we have to make a lot of stuff. I mean, in the old days, like an American Werewolf in London, for example, John Landis just said, I want the wolf to be a four-legged hound from hell, you know. I wanted it to be a biped, you know. Got a little bit of argument, he's the director, he wins, you know, but four-legged hound from hell, make it, you know. I did a painting, I go, I want to make something like this. Yeah, you're the expert, make it. Now it's everybody, you know, let's see 2,000 designs and we'll pick what we like the best, you know, and it's like, let's do one in between this one and that one and this one and that one. And it gets to the point where it like kind of sucks your heart out of it, for one, you know, and just the essence of the design. I mean, so many times we'll go back to the very first thing that I did, you know, and that, you know, American Werewolf people, you know, still think that looks pretty good, and that was just like that sculpted wolf head was the only one I did. That was it, you know. And you know, like I said, I did a rough painting of what I wanted it to look like, and then as I was sculpting it, I changed it because Landis gave me that opportunity, and that's, you know. Some of
the less like contrived kind of design kind of things are subtle things like this, like just realistic prosthetics.
Yeah, this is a Mr. Wong from Norbit, who Eddie played an old Asian man. So this is a silicone gel-filled appliance, which is this nice mushy stuff. But yeah, it's very, you know, this had to look like a real person, so it's a very subtle paint job with lots of little spots of, you know, almost transparent paint flecked on, you know.
Yeah, the opportunity to be able to see these things and almost, you know, learn from the painting style and the subtlety and the sculpture. You know, a lot of people, you know, over-sculpt their age things and over-paint their, you know, makeups that are supposed to be relatively subtle. Mm-hmm. I think there's an enormous amount of education that's on all these shelves.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that, you know, I'm kind of excited about. These things, you know, for so long I stored this stuff and kept it. That was one of the great things about having a huge studio like I had. It was 60,000 square feet. You know, about 30,000 of it was storage, and the problem is you keep a lot of stuff, you know, and you know, some of it is, you know, in a box and I hadn't seen it in many years, you know, and I like the idea that somebody now will get something and it will be their treasure, you know, it'll be a treasured thing, you know, but also they can see how we did it back in the day. You know?
One of the other things that I really love are the heads from Devil's Advocate. Can we go check those out?
Sure, let's go.
So I found some cool little heads.
Yeah.
These guys are from Devil's Advocate.
Yes.
And then you later put them into your little haunted house in the shop.
Yeah, that's right. They were, these rods popped them up and scared people.
Can you tell me a little bit about like just the thought process behind these crazy designs?
Yeah, well, it was, you know, they wanted these demons, and they weren't, you know, they didn't want necessarily traditional demons with horns and pointy ears. And I remember doing a whole bunch of Photoshop designs of things and kind of came up with these concepts. And the way they were actually used in the film is they shot the actors in the scene, and then we moved these heads. They were on like a motion-based thing that we could program it to kind of move it, and then they kind of morphed between the real person and these heads. So that I don't think it ever went totally 100% these heads in the film. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they were fun to do.
Yeah, this goes back to, you know, just the educational opportunity to see some of the sculpture techniques and the paint jobs, like this paint on this guy's forehead and some of the details on this guy's face. Like, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, well, I did the sculpture to a certain point, and I blocked it out and did a pretty finished version, you know, on the one side, and then let somebody else complete it, you know. And again, almost everything that has hair on it like this, I trimmed and dressed all the hair. I actually have this pair of scissors that I got when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. That was my first, like, you know, big purchase for a pair of nice barber shears that I've trimmed everything I've ever done with these scissors.
And that's not in the auction.
And it's not in the auction. No, they're my magic scissors. I got to keep them. I don't know how they still work, but I mean, I trimmed the Greystoke apes with it. I trimmed Digit. I trimmed Harry.
Wow.
I trimmed this stuff, you know, Joe, everything with these magic scissors. Wolfman even.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool stuff. A lot of history in this.
Yeah.
I think Norm found some stuff over there that he wants to ask you about.
He's kind of a pain, that guy. How did you get hooked up with him?
Rick, I couldn't let you go without talking about Men in Black.
Yeah, that's been a big part of my career.
Yeah, because you worked on 3 Men in Black movies. You did so many different types of creatures. And we have in this auction stuff from those films. So tell me the stories about some of these. The Worms, for example.
The worm guys, yeah. I mean, that's so funny to me that everybody knows these guys as worm guys. Because I was never good at making up names for these things. So it's like, what do you call this guy? He's a worm guy, you know? And, so everything in that movie was something guy, you know. But what happened on that film is we were kind of in design hell. There were so many people involved in the designs and nothing was getting approved and time was wasting. So let's sculpt, let's do a design that's a little skinny thing that we could do a little rod puppet and do some rod removal or something. And we started, this guy was the first thing we made on that film. And what happened is, you know, so many people were involved and wanted to be involved in the design that we just put it on a shelf. I said, they had nothing to do with this. They're not going to approve it. We just put it away. We had actually made a mold, put the mold on a shelf. On the first film, we came up with a lot of the ideas for what was in the film because to me, being a geek fanboy, you know, this kind of movie, I kept saying, you know, it's a movie about aliens on Earth and there's hardly any aliens in the movie. And the things that are in the script, I think aren't very cool. And originally, Will's introduction to the fact that aliens went on Earth in the first draft of the script that I read took place in a bar, and the bartender was an alien, and Tommy Lee Jones says, well, you know, Chucky here is an alien, and he says, show him Chucky, and in the script it says Chucky lifts up his neck and light comes out. And it's like, you know, and that's a missed opportunity if you ask me.
It's not just a dude blinking with 2 eyelids.
Yeah, you know, but yeah, you know, and I just thought, you know, this should be something really cool, you know, so, well, what would you do? And it's like, well, what if he says, you know, Chucky here, the bartender's an alien, and you see the bartender look around and then his face opens up and there's a little green man inside his head working his levers and with TV monitors in there and then like pulls a lever and the face slams shut, you know. I go, we love that idea, that's great, you know. So we made it, they cast a guy that was a bartender, we made a head of the bartender, we did all his stuff, and then one day they came over and said, oh, we're not gonna do that anymore. And I went, I thought you loved that idea. And they go, we do love it. You know, we love it so much, we're going to put him in Mr. Gentle and we're going to give him important dialogue in the movie. And well, we don't have a small version of the head, but we'd already sculpted a little alien guy, and his head is like that big, and his mouth is like that big, you know. And I go, and I said, and he's going to have dialogue, you know. So we ended up building a big puppet for so we had the little guy inside the head, and then we had a great big interior of the head that ILM built. That our puppets had in.
Wow, so it's a blown up, scaled up version.
Right, which then was split into the head. So yeah, this was a big animatronic puppet. We pre-recorded the dialogue. Mark Satrakian, who actually did the dialogue, who's my puppeteer and my head mechanical guy, wrote this program so he could computer control the lip movement, and we pre-did that to the time code on the tape. So you just push the tape and the mouth would do the lip sync perfectly every time, you know, and then the rest was puppeteered live. So.
Oh wow! And then going from the first movie to the next 2, you know, you had the opportunity to do more designs, basically. So what was your approach there, and what did you want to bring?
Well, the thing that was so hard in the first movie is none of us knew what Man in Black was, and we discovered that on the first movie. And then, you know, on the second one, we knew a little bit more, but we kind of didn't listen to what the first movie was, and there were things in it like the poop dog. There was a guy that's supposed to look like dog poop, you know, and the Balchinian and some crazy concepts that was like, all right, you know. But yeah, it's evolved, you know. Men in Black 3 was an idea that, because, you know, in Men in Black 1, they said, we want to see aliens unlike anything we've seen before. And I go, that's really hard. You know, it was a lot easier on Star Wars. But since Star Wars, every space movie had a cantina scene, you know, and you know, every Star Trek TV series had a bunch of aliens, and it's really hard.
Guys in makeup and suits,
yeah, and it's really hard to, you know, to do something like nobody had seen before. And I said, why don't we do things like people had seen before, like things that we've seen in movies from the 50s and 60s, as if they were based on something that somebody really saw, you know, but do a better version of them. And they said, no, we don't like that idea. So Men in Black 2 came along, I pitched that same idea again, and said, no, we don't like that idea. And Men in Black 3 had that time travel element. And so I pitched the same idea again, and this time they went for it, which I had a lot of fun doing that.
Well, it sounds like having fun is like the thread that goes through your entire career. And this is just a warehouse full of fun.
Full of fun, yeah.
So many stories here. We could spend days just looking at everything. And most of it's going away to the auction.
Yeah.
What are you keeping for yourself?
Well, I've kept some things, and as I walk through here, I'm going, why didn't I keep this? And I should have kept that, you know. The problem is, you know, it cost me a fortune to keep this stuff over the years, you know. Storage, especially in the building, it wasn't just a storage building, it was in my studio. But I am excited, like I said, that, you know, it'll be a treasure for somebody.
Absolutely, and as Frank mentioned, it's going to be a great learning experience for people to get their hands on it, to appreciate it. You know, that it's not just the physical, but it's also your thought process. It's your techniques, it's what you thought about in that moment in time, and that's all going out there. Thank you so much, Rick.
Oh, my pleasure.
For chatting with us.
Thanks for doing this.
Oh my God.
There's like everything in here.
It's so amazing. First of all, thanks to Rick again for spending his time telling us amazing stories about his collection. Thanks to Prop Store for housing this, for putting up the auction that's going on right now.
I need to go bid on that stuff.
I know. The great thing is it's all like no reserve. I think everything starts at $5.
I'm putting $5 on everything.
Put $5 on everything. Rick has so many good stories. And what are the things that's walking around that caught your eye?
You know, we didn't really even talk about it, but the stuff from the Haunted Mansion, the zombie masks and all the background zombies, like those designs are beautiful.
I was so surprised at how well things held up.
Yeah.
You know, things that were made 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Well, I think a little bit of this has to do with Tom Spina, who's spent some time restoring some of these things and touching up some stuff.
Yeah, it's so cool. And of course, this auction, Prop Store is hosting it. It's at Hilton, the Universal City. You can bid online, and if you're watching this video after May 29th, go check out Prop Store. They have other stuff, maybe some other Rick Baker stuff as well. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. It's Frank. I'm Norm from Tested here at Prop Store. We'll see you next time.